been in business, seen how the real world operates, before you take a step back into sort of theoretically, how should we be doing things just to meet our risk appetite?
Yes.
You need that practical exposure.
Yes.
And that's where I like this here. And as I say, I think you could take that knowledge and apply it into pretty much any industry.
Mm.
And I see it coming through in my thinking when friends come and talk about, some issue they're having with an education there. I know a lot of teachers.
Yes.
Okay, let's think about this. Okay, so the financial part is teachers need a salary to live.
Yeah.
But operational, relationship, human resources, and all those kind of things, start playing into it.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think what's interesting about that is it also makes you redefine what a risk is.
Yes.
And I think especially the way that actuarial science is set up in the first couple of years, you would just think that it's quantitative. And I think all risk can have quantitative outworking, right? But that's not necessarily how it originates. And if you can sort of mitigate at the origin, then you don't necessarily get the quantitative ramification.
Yes, exactly.
Which is an interesting thing to kind of think through the system then. But something interesting you said, still linking to risk, is that you are very interested in mental health. And now obviously that's a risk in and of itself to people and to people functioning and flourishing. Explain to our listeners like why that's something that you're interested in and the work that you do in that space.
So this came up as being something very relevant to me when I was going through a very difficult period in my life for a number of different reasons. And I started to suffer from anxiety and depression.
Sure.
And it took me quite a while even to admit that this was what I'm
massive, right? Yeah.
And this is all well pre-COVID.
Yeah.
But I went through that process of realizing that I wasn't coping, starting to talk to professionals, seeing a psychologist, eventually going on to some medication. And I resisted that for so long. And I looked back now, why? Why was I so dead set against taking antidepressants?
Yes.
But having been through that and then got to a point where I was actually in a nice state of equilibrium where I was still taking the antidepressants, I was still seeing my psychologist, but life was kind of on an even keel.
Yes.
I looked back and realized how important it had been to me that I was able to have open conversations with my boss, who's the managing director, the head of human resources, some of my colleagues, to say, listen, this is where I am at the moment.
Yes.
This is why I may not be acting like my usual self. I may not be delivering at my usual level.
Yes.
I will do what I can to catch up, but this is how you can support me.
Got you.
And I realized that it's so important to be able to have those conversations, and again, this is talking pre-COVID, there was still this huge stigma about talking about depression in the workplace.
Yes.
So this shame of like,
that's your own problem.
Yes, exactly. Kind of not something you bring to work. That's your private life.
Yeah.
And we spend so much of our waking lives in the workplace. If we don't have that there, it sets us back so far in terms of how we can actually walk this journey and reach a point of healing for ourselves.
But also being seen as a person in your workplace and not just fundamentally as a resource.
Yes, you're a whole person and what's happening at home affects you at work, what's happening at work affects you at home.
Exactly.
So it's very important to look at it from that perspective. And what actually ended up happening was we were sitting in a social and ethics committee meeting and we were talking about the rise in depression and how we tackle the stigma about being able to talk about depression in the workplace. And someone said, oh, it would be a great idea if someone senior in the organization could stand up and talk about their journey and sort of break that stigma. So I was like, oh, well, I guess that's a fairly direct... He's like, it always do. And no one knew at that point. But to me, it was like, oh, beam of light coming out. And so I did that. We've had...
that must have been quite difficult.
It was. It was very hard.
It also so encouraging, I think, then, to people who's can witness that.
Yeah, so we had 3 sessions, 2 at Hannover and 1 at Compass, which is one of our subsidiaries.
Yeah.
And the way we did it was I did a presentation jointly with one of our medical doctors. So they talked about the medical and the physiological aspects of anxiety.
Oh, that's multidisciplinary. Oh, very cool.
And then I told my story, obviously without going into all the details about how I got there in the first
place. No, of course.
That's my personal...
No, 100%.
But saying, this is what I experienced, this is how I felt. These are the days when I just couldn't get out of bed.
Yes.
And this is what talking to my colleagues did for me. This is what seeing a therapist did for me, and so on. And then, very importantly, we had a psychologist from the South African Depression and Anxiety League who sat in on each of those sessions. Because at the end, I said, "Look, I'm sharing my story to open this up. I do not have capacity to carry anyone else's pain.
No, agreed.
But if something in this talk has triggered something in you,
it's you in your risk management, eh?
So instead of hitting my bed with the gravity, yes.
But it is very true what you say, and that I see it in my students as well, is that they don't think that their mental state is something they need to look after as much as their sort of academic prowess, if you want to call it that. And I know you did say before we started recording that you also are starting to get involved in the actuarial association with regard to this. Can you speak to that as well?
Yes, I think there'll be more coming up, but I know ASA is very focused as well on this topic of mental wellness.
Yeah, I've been seeing some things on LinkedIn, actually, a couple of like seminars and that sort of thing.
So I'm looking to get involved in that space as well and share a bit of my experience. We've done it through the Actuarial Women's Committee as part of the SABA.
Yes.
And they have their leadership development program, and I give an equivalent version of my talk on depression and my journey there. And now we're looking to open the conversation up more widely to the whole ASA community. So to say we are whole people, we bring these challenges, and the more we can support each other and lift each other up, the better for all of us and for humanity as a whole. Really.
Yeah.
Actuaries are actuaries, but we're also human.
Yes, exactly. Believe it or not. I think that's really insightful. I think something off the back of that, without putting words in your mouth, what would be a piece of advice or encouragement that you would give to an aspiring actuary, whether that is a student that just started or someone who's just started in the workplace? What sort of pieces of advice that you give?
Okay, so a few things that I would say. Firstly, is just go for it. If this is your dream, pursue it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's going to be tough. Persist. As I mentioned, it took me 17 years to qualify. There were times when I wanted to give it all up. I was tired of my evenings and my weekends being taken up with studying. I took a break when I had kids, and to go back to it afterwards and to hand my children over to someone else so that I could sit in front of my books was hard. But it was worth it. And that resilience you develop from that, from accepting failures and persisting until you succeed, I think is something that stands you in great stead in the workplace and in your life as a whole.
Yeah, the character development that comes from being like, okay, I've been knocked down. Thanks to get up again without singing the song. But yeah, I completely resonate with that.
Yes. And then the other thing I'd say is be curious, ask questions. So don't let yourself get put into a box. Don't put yourself into a box.
Yes.
Of looking just at the numbers that are in front of you. Ask questions. That's how I got into risk management. I wanted to know how the work I was doing, where the inputs came from, where the outputs went to, how did it actually affect them?
Yes, like how did it work within the larger system?
Yes. And I think a very important thing, and I think this is something that some people struggle with in their careers, getting to the point where you go past the numbers. So the numbers and the model, and actually the model are very important.
Yes.
But you need to be able to turn that into a story.
Yes.
And say it's not just that the model told me that our catastrophe exposures are 20% higher now than they were a year ago.
Yes.
What's led to that?
Yes.
Is it inflation? Is it they took on a whole new portfolio? Is it we're aggressively writing business in that area?
Yes.
Tie it back to the business and explain it in terms that your business people can understand.
Exactly.
And don't just believe everything that comes out of your model without questioning it and say, see, this 20% looks high. And maybe there was an error somewhere. Maybe this is how you know.
Exactly.
If you don't have that connection to what's going on in the business, you won't actually be able to find or realize that there's an error until a market process.
Cool.
And just for your own development and understanding, I think tying that in and being able to tell the story behind the numbers is a very, very valuable skill.
Well, it's also, I think, so much easier to remember when you understand something within a story, and sort of remember the skills that you developed, because it's kind of there's that connection, right? Whereas if you just see like a set of results, it's like, oh, okay, I can see that it's going up or it's going down, but then kind of like out in the one ear, out the other, unless it's connected to like an overall narrative, which I think is very important. And that's, I think, something that students don't see as being important, because I guess also in your undergrad, you're not really telling stories, right? You're more learning words to tell stories. And then you get to sort of your later subjects where it's like, okay, you tell a story now. And everyone's like, no, I want to write my words.
Where can I put my formula?
Exactly. So very, very interesting.
But I think without sort of straying into anthropology,
that is.
The history of humanity is a history of storytelling. The concept of a written history is a relatively recent thing in our development, and stories have been handed down, or our whole history, our whole development and knowledge has been handed down through stories for so many generations. And yes, now we have written things and now we have the internet. Yes, but we still, you learn so much just from listening to your parents telling you stories when you're little, and those are the things that stick.
Yeah, very much so. But thank you so much for your time, Sue. I think this was so insightful.
That's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. The time's just flown.
I know. I think it's been amazing. And to our listeners, Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review on your preferred streaming platform. If you'd like to interact with us more or add questions or topics to our pool of ideas, please follow our Instagram page at A is for Actuary or email us on asforactuary@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Take care.